Hi, welcome to QuickLearn Office Hours, where QuickLearn training staff answers questions from our students. I'm Rob Callaway. On today's episode, we're looking at a question from Doug. Now, Doug was trying to rerun one of the labs from our Developer Deep Dive course, and when he went to go do that lab, it starts with a setup script or a setup step that is deploying some MSIs, giving us some assets for him to work with. And basically his email was saying that when he went to go deploy that MSI, he was getting this error. Now, the error is telling him that it's unable to update the binding information for the call queue file send port, right? And basically it says that there's a couple of mismatches within the host, right? The host name and or trust level are mismatched. Now, Doug is almost to answering his own question by calling out the fact that his host is named BizTalk Application Host rather than BizTalk Server Application. That's the typical default name that we get for hosts when we're setting up a new BizTalk environment, unless, of course, you provide an alternate name. A deeper explanation of what's going on with Doug's problem here, an extrapolation that we could all apply in our own situations as well, is very, very simple. The heart of Doug's problem is that the settings that he has in the binding file and or MSI file, because most of the time our MSI files just simply contain a binding file with a bunch of settings in them, may not actually match the settings of the system that I'm deploying to. For larger context here, basically the BizTalk host, sometimes we represent that as the handler. That host or that handler is really just a container that we use to organize processes. Now, there's lots of different reasons why I want that container. This is not the time or place to talk about that. But within my host, I could have a send port, a receive location, an orchestration. Any one of those three types of work is going to live within a host. Now, our binding files or our MSI files are going to contain some settings related to that host. For example, the name of the host is going to be in the binding file. The trust level for the host is going to be in that binding file. And if the settings that my actual system uses differ from the settings expressed in the binding file, if they don't match up, it's not going to apply correctly. We're going to get the same errors that Doug had. Let's start by seeing if we can recreate Doug's problem in our own system here. I have a very basic application here named hosts. I've got some resources already deployed, I guess just a single assembly. Currently, I don't have any receive ports or send ports configured. Now, I do have a binding file, and within this binding file, we have a few send port definitions. I have a high value orders send port defined. I have a low value orders send port defined. I also have a receive port named new orders that contains a receive location named new orders file. So we've got a few different objects here defined within our binding file. If I go and import that binding file to my application, we're getting the exact same error that Doug had. Now, I guess maybe it's not exactly the same, because in Doug's case, he was deploying from an MSI, and here I'm just simply using the binding file. So our error ends up being a little more specific to the binding file rather than the MSI that contains the binding file. But nonetheless, what we see is it's having trouble updating the configuration of the high value orders send port, because the handler host that does not exist for the file adapter with an untrusted trust level can't match up. Those are the settings that reside in the binding file. and we can't find anything in the system we're trying to deploy to that matches those settings. Now, to fix this, I could go and create the host that does not exist, or alternatively, I could update that binding file. So if I come into my binding file, we'll just go ahead and do a find for host that does not exist, right? And it turns out that we have, just copy paste to make sure, we have only one instance of that. So I'll replace this with a host that I know does exist, which in this case will be BizTalk. BizTalk Server application. That's the name of our host by default. So just to verify over here in our host container, I do have the BizTalk Server application host. So if I save that binding file, I saved it there. We'll go ahead and try to import once again. And when we import, so now it's giving us a different error. This time the error relates to the low value orders. Previously it was the high value orders. And now it's telling us that the file handler, my trusted host, with trust level untrusted, can't be found. Again, if I'm just kind of looking around at what's going on in here, I do have a host named my trusted host. So the name looks fine. What doesn't quite look fine is that my trusted host is a trusted host. And in the binding file, apparently, it's configured as an untrusted host. So I could either change this from trusted to untrusted, or I could go and update the binding file. Let's go fix our binding file. So if I look for host trusted, right, we can see, there we go. We can see that the BizTalk Server application host, that's not the one that gives us the grief there. That's trusted false. My trusted host, it says host trusted. This should be true. All right, so save that right there. We'll try our import one more time, see what happens. So there, no errors, and we get our send ports, we get our receive port, receive location. And we're able to get our binding file importing successfully. So my answer to Doug for his question was very simple. We can either update the binding file that our MSIs or deployment scripts are using, or we can update our system so it matches. This, I think, actually brings up a larger problem, which is a problem of keeping our systems consistent throughout. What I mean by that is, having one collection of hosts in development and having a totally different collection of hosts in test and a third collection of hosts that live in production. This can create a lot of deployment grief for us. What I would always recommend to our BizTalk developers and even administrators coming through class is that they establish early what the conventions for their hosts are going to be. And whatever those conventions are, which we've talked about how to establish those conventions and why I would choose to have a bunch of different hosts versus, just a handful of them. Whatever our decisions are regarding the number of hosts that we're going to have and the configuration of those hosts, we want it to be consistent across all of our BizTalk environments. So I don't really have to worry about this sort of stuff when I go to deploy to dev or test or production, because it's kind of just consistent across the board. In this episode of QuickLearn Office Hours, you got a taste of how those BizTalk hosts are represented in binding files and MSIs. I hope you can take that and apply that in your real life. If you're looking for other learning options, please check out the other QuickLearn Office Hour videos found right here. Or come to one of our instructor-led training courses. We've got courses on BizTalk Server, Azure App Service and Logic Apps, as well as Team Foundation Server. You can find out more about those courses at QuickLearn.com. For now, I'm Rob Callaway, and thanks for joining me here with QuickLearn Office Hours.